We continue now at the top of Daf Peiches Amud Aleph Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 88a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara was discussing what a father is entitled to from his daughter who's a minor. The particular discussion was, let's say the daughter who's a minor gets injured, is he entitled to that or not? Reish Lakish said he is not entitled, and Rabbi Yochanan said that he is entitled, but the question was, the way Rabbi Yochanan phrased it, he said that he's entitled to Pitzia, which seems to be a wound where there's no diminishment of his value, of her value, and therefore the Gemara asked, would he really be entitled to that? The only question was when there's a diminishment in terms of her value, and that's what the Gemara now says, the Afchasa Mikasba. We were talking about injuries where there's a diminishment in terms of what her value is, so then we were saying maybe the father's entitled to it. Avol Pitzia, but what's called a Pitzia, which is just a wound, the Lo Afchasa Mikasba, which doesn't cause that there's any diminishment of her value. Lo Kami Boile, that wasn't even a question. Certainly the father is not entitled to that. Rashi explains the Afchase Mikasbe Vahare Biyado Lamochra. The idea over here is that the father, in theory, has the ability to sell her off to be an Amo Ivriya, to be a servant. So therefore, since he has that ability, he's able to get something, let's say, possibly where there's a diminishment of her value. But again, if there's no diminishment of her value, so Lo Kami Boile, that wasn't even a question. So how could Rabbi Yochanan say that he's entitled to that? And the Gemara answers to that. Amar Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina says, Shepatza b'foneha. The case over here is that the wound is on her face. V'afchasa mikaspa, so therefore there is a diminishment of her value, and that's what Rabbi Yochanan meant to say. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, "Hachovel be'eved Kanani shel acherim chayev v'chulu." If somebody wounds an eved Kanani that belongs to others, so then the person is chayev to pay all 5 of the payments, nezek, sar, ripoy, sheves, and boshes. And the Mishnah went on to say, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that there is no boshes for avodim. And the Gemara now says, my time with Rabbi Yehuda, what's the reason of Rabbi Yehuda? The reason is Amar Kratz, because the pasuk says, Ki notzu anashim yachtov ish v'yachiv. It says that they're fighting with one another, a man and his brother. And we understand that to mean b'mi sheyesh lo achva. It means somebody who's part of the brotherhood. Yotza eved, that comes to exclude an eved. It comes to exclude an eved kanani. She'ein lo achva, he's not considered to be part of the brotherhood. And therefore there is no boshes. That pasuk of Ki notzu anashim yachtov, that is the source for the concept of boshes. And the Gemara says, V'Rabbanan. Now, what do the Rabbanan respond to this? What do they do with this pasuk? They understand as follows: Achiv hu b'mitzvahs. That really, an eved is considered to be part of the brotherhood because he is part of mitzvahs, and therefore, since he's part of mitzvahs, he's included within this pasuk. Rashi explains, Yotza eved she'ein lo achva. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the eved does not have achva. Why? Meaning, im Yisrael, he doesn't have achva with Klal Yisrael she'ein Babba kol, because he's not allowed to marry into the community. That's the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda. Whereas the Rabbanan say, Rashi goes on, b'mitzvahs, Rashi says, as long as he's shaykh in mitzvahs, meaning kol mitzvah sha'isha chayeves, but any mitzvah that a woman is obligated in, eved chayeba, and eved kanani is also chayev. The Gamar lo lo me'isha, that's learned from a Gezerah Shaveh. It says law by isha, and we learn from there to eved kanani that he's chayev in those particular mitzvahs. But the Gemara continues, Elameata, but according to that, Rabbi Yehuda, Zomimei Eved, let's say have Edom Zomimin by an Eved Kanani, Lo Yaharogu, so they shouldn't be killed. Because it's written in the Pasuk, Vasisam Lo Kasher Zomam Lasos Liachiv. It says the word Achiv over there as well, so Eved Kanani should be excluded, so Edom Zomin also, that Pasuk is by Edom Zomin. As Rashi says, Zomimei Eved, the Edom Zomin by Eved, Edom Shechayvuhu Misas Bezdin. Let's say you have Edom, and they were Mechayev him that he gets Misas Bezdin, but it turns out, V'nimtzu Zomin, those Edom were trying to get him the death penalty, but they turned out to be Zomimin Lo Yaharogu, so they shouldn't be killed. However, Alama Kimlan, but why therefore do we hold the Eved Ki Yisrael Inyan Misas Bezin? We say an Eved is just like a Yisrael when it comes to Misas Bezin. The Tananas, we learn the Mishnah of Meseches Makas. We learn the Meseches Makas in the Mishnah of Yisrael Loka V'Gola Al Yedei Eved. It says Yisrael is Loka and Gola Al Yedei Eved, and that shouldn't be the case again because it says the word Achiv over there. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava, Amar Rav Sheshes, Amar Kra. Rava says that Rav Sheshes says that it says in the pasuk, Uviyarta harami kirbecha, it says that you have to destroy the evil from your midst. And we learn from that pasuk, Mikol Makom, that it applies in all situations, even by an Eved Kanani. But the Gemara continues, Elameata, but again, according to what we said above, L'Rabbanan Eved Yehei Kasher L'Malchus. According to the Rabbanan, an Eved should be okay to be a king because they're considering that it is considered, that an Eved Kanani is considered to be part of the Achva. And the Gemara says to that, Amri, so the sages respond to that. But according to your reasoning that you're asking, that according to the Rabbanan, an Eved should be kosher to be a king, Tikshi lach a ger, you should have the same question by a ger, l'divrei hakol, according to everyone. A ger also should be able to be a melech. Rather, the answer is because the pasuk says mikerev achecha. When it talks about a king, it does use the word achecha, but it says mikerev achecha, and we understand that to mean mimuvchar shebeachicha, from the choicest of your brothers, and therefore not only is an eved excluded, but a ger is excluded as well. And Rashi explains, Tikshi lach ger, you should have the same question by a ger. And Rashi says, Shalei daso v'horaso b'kedusha. We're talking even a situation where the person was born and was conceived b'kedusha, meaning to say the person's parents were converts. Even in that situation, afilu Rabbi Yehuda yesh lo achva. Even according to Rabbi Yehuda, in that situation, certainly we would say there's achva. However, upasal malchus. However, nevertheless, that person is disqualified for being king. Ve'afilu l'shoter bi'alma. He's even disqualified for being a shoter, for being a ruler. Elim kein imo Yisrael, unless his mother was from Klal Yisrael, b'perka choletz b'yavamas. That's found in Meseches Yavamas, and so therefore, again, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, a ger should be kosher in terms of malchus, and that's not true. And the Gemara ultimately answered that we learn from Mikarev Achecha that it has to be mimuvchar shebe'achecha. And the Gemara continues, Ela me'ata, but according to what we said above, l'Rabbanan, according to the Rabbanan, that again an Eved is considered achiv, yehi Eved kosher le'edus, so an Eved should be kosher for edus, he should be able to testify. T'chsiv, as it's written, v'hinei eid sheker ha'ed, sheker ana bi'achiv, it uses the word achiv over there. And again, according to the Rabbanan, an Eved should be included. We know an Eved is not. And the Gemara says, Amar Ula says, Eidus lo matas amar. You can't possibly say that an Eved Kanani is included in Eidus, because Asya Eidus be kal v'chomer me'isha, because we can make a kal v'chomer from a woman, Uma isha shehi ru'uya lava b'kahal, if when it comes to a woman who is able to enter into the community, but we know psula le'edus, we know she's disqualified in terms of Eidus, in terms of testimony. Eved she'eno roi lava b'kahal, when it comes to an Eved who's not able to enter into the community, Eino din shapasa le'edus, shouldn't it be true that he's disqualified for testimony? But the Gemara says you can't learn from Isha. Mala Isha shekain eina ru'uya lamila. When it comes to an Isha, there's no bris milah, so maybe that's why she's excluded from Edus. Tomar be'eved shu roy lamila. When it comes to an Eved Kanani, he is roy for bris milah, and so therefore maybe he should be able to be an aid. And the Gemara says to that, katan yochiach, that a minor can prove the other way. She yeshno b'mila upasal li'edus. A katan, a minor, is part of bris milah, but he is disqualified from being an aid. So to an Eved is disqualified. But the Gemara says, mala katan she'eno b'mitzvahs. But when it comes to a minor, he's not chayiv in mitzvahs. Tomer be'eved shu b'mitzvahs. But an Eved is chayiv in mitzvahs. So maybe he should be able to be an aid. Isha tochiach. But again, a woman can prove the other direction. She yeshno b'mitzvahs upsula le'edus. She is part of mitzvahs, but again, she's disqualified from testimony. And so therefore we can learn from a tzad hashava, from the two of them. The chazar hadin, it goes back and forth. Lo roi zeh karoi zeh, v'lo roi zeh karoi zeh. This one is not like this one, meaning Isha is not like katan, and katan is not like Isha. Hatzad hashava shebehen, the common denominator is shekein einon b'chol ha-mitzvahs. These are individuals who aren't included in all mitzvahs. Upsulin lohayed, and they're disqualified from testifying. Afani avi asa eved, so too I can include the eved she'eno b'chol ha-mitzvahs. He too is not part of all mitzvahs, upasal lohayed, and therefore he's disqualified from testifying, and that's why an eved is excluded from edus. But the Gemara still says, but when it comes to the common denominator, we can say, Shekain Eino Ish, none of them are considered Ish. A woman is not considered Ish. A katan is not considered Ish. Tomar be'eved shu Ish, when it comes to an Eved is considered Ish, is considered to be a man, so maybe he should be able to be an aid. And so then the Gemara says, Elatesi mi gazlan. Rather, we can learn it out from a gazlan, someone who's a thief, certainly is not able to be an aid. But the Gemara says, Mala gazlan, but what's unique about a gazlan is Shekain Mais of Garmalo. It's because of his own actions that he's not able to be an aid, because he stole. And therefore, since he stole, that's what disqualifies him from Edus. Tomar be'eved, whereas we'll say by Eved, she'ein ma'asav garmulo, there was nothing that he did, it wasn't any of his actions that should cause that he can't be an aid. And so then the Gemara ultimately says, Elatesi mi gazlan umechad mehanach. We can learn it out from a tzad hashav. If you take gazlan and one of the other two cases we brought, either ish or katan, you put those together, you'll be able to have a tzad hashav that excludes an Eved as well. And Rashi explains, Edus lo matas amar, you can't learn that Edus, that an Eved should be kosher, the lo nafkal and psula me'achicha tesim mikal v'chomer, because even if we didn't learn that he's disqualified from the fact, in terms of the halach, it has to be a brother, but we can learn from the following kal v'chomer, that an Eved is going to be excluded, because again, psula le'edus, it says, we know by an Isha, she's puzzle for edus, t'chsiv gabe edim zomen, it's written by edim zomen, v'amdu shnehu anoshim, it says anoshim, v'tanya b'shvuas be'edim zomen ha'kasam edaber, we learn in the Bryce and Shvuas, that we're talking about edim zomen in that pasuk, the mashma anoshim v'lo noshim, therefore the pasuk is saying men and not women, and katan nami mehachanafkal, and Rashi says katan also is learned from the same pasuk, t'chsiv anoshim v'lo katanim, it says anoshim, we understand, not katanim, not minors. And further, the Eidos She'iyat Hayachol Lazimahi. Rashi also says the reason a katan is excluded for a different reason, because if a katan testifies, it's what we call Eidos She'iyat Hayachol Lazima. It's testimony that cannot be falsified. You can't give a katan the punishment of kasher zamam, the lav bar onshenu, because a katan can't be punished. Einan b'chol mitzvahs. So then the Gemara said at tzad hashava that they're both not in all mitzvahs, ela b'mixas, meaning when it comes to isha and katan, they're only in some mitzvahs. The ha'isha mechuyeves b'lav and v'onshin. For example, a woman is chayiv in terms of the negative commandments and also punishments. The katan yeshno b'mila, a minor is included in some mitzvahs, meaning like bris mila, and so therefore that could be a tzad hashava, and therefore we would say when it comes to an eved as well. But then we said she'ein ish, when it comes to katan and isha, they're not considered an ish, they're not a man. V'lo karina b'hu shnei anoshim, it's not called shnei anoshim. And so then the Gemara said you can learn from Gazlan. Mi Gazlan deroy lovo bekal. Gazlan is allowed to enter into the community. Upasaledus, we know a Gazlan is disqualified from testimony. The Chsiv is written al tashas yodcha v'gomer kalam al tashas rasha the chamas aid. We learn from this if a person is considered a rasha, not able to be an aid. And finally, the Gemara said mi Gazlan v'chad mehanach. Just take Gazlan and then one of the two. Either it's going to be the ish or katan, and you'll be able to learn out Eved as well. Rashi understands what's the common denominator, that they're not careful in all mitzvahs. One of them is because he's a rasha, that's the Gazlan, and the other one is not commanded. Either we're talking about ish or katan, it doesn't matter, but either way we can learn out from there that an Eved is disqualified from being an aid. And the Gemara continues, Mar Berei de Ravina Amar, Mar, the son of Ravina, he said a different source, how we know that an Eved is not able to be an aid, talking specifically about Eved Kanani, Amar Krutz, because the Pasuk says, Lo Yumsu Avos Al Bonim. It says that the fathers cannot die on account of the sons, and we understand the pasuk as follows: Lo yumsu al pi avos she'ein lahem chayis banim. People should not be put to death through fathers who their sons are not considered to be part of their lineage. In terms of an Eved Kanani, an Eved Kanani has a son that's not considered to be his lineage, and therefore the Eved Kanani cannot be an aid. Now, if you think this pasuk should be understood the way it sounds, meaning lo yumsu avos al bonim be'edus bonim, maybe the pasuk simply means that the fathers should not be put to death based on the testimony of their sons, because there you're dealing with testimony of krovim, testimony of relatives. But if that's what the pasuk meant, lichtov rachmana lo yumsu avos al b'neihem, it should have said, the pasuk should have said that the fathers cannot be put to death al b'neihem on account of their sons. My bonim, why does it say bonim instead of b'neihem? Shma mina. So you see from the fact that the pasuk is phrased in this manner, to lo yumsu al pi avos she'ein lam chayis bonim, that what it really means is that people cannot be put to death through fathers who, again, their sons are not part of their lineage. That's referring to Eved Kanani. But the Gemara says, but according to that, what about the next part of the pasuk? It says, Uvonim lo yumsu alavos. It says the sons cannot be put to death based on the fathers. So hachanami. So there also we should interpret it the same way. Lo yumsu al pi bonim she'en lem chayis avos. That you shouldn't put people to death based on the testimony of sons who don't have lineage with their fathers. That would refer to a ger. A convert does not have chayis avos, doesn't have lineage with his father. So ela ger. So are we going to say rather that a ger hachanami the pasal edus? Are we going to say that a convert is going to be disqualified from edus? That's not true. And so the Gemara says, Amri, the sages say, Hachi hashta, what kind of comparison are you making? Ger nihida ein lo chayis lamala, lamata yesh lo chayis. When it comes to a convert, so it's true that there's no lineage above the ger, meaning with his father, but there is lineage below, meaning to his children. Lafuk eved, but that comes to exclude an eved. The ein lo chayis lo lamala v'lo lamata is not considered to have lineage in both directions, up or down, and therefore we're going to say that an eved is in fact excluded from being an aid. And the Gemara proves that this is the case. The salka daitach ger pasal edus, because if it would enter your mind that a ger, a convert, is being disqualified from edus from this pasuk, so then the pasuk could actually be written differently. Lichtov rachmana lo yumsu avos al b'neihem. The pasuk could write as follows. The first part of the pasuk could say lo yumsu avos al b'neihem. Again, it should use on their children. Lichid amrinan, and we'd interpret that as what we said, that it means based on the testimony of the sons. Lo yumsu avos, you can't put the fathers to death. Lo yumsu be'edus bonim, that they can't be put to death. They can't be put to death based on the testimony of their sons. And then v'nichtov rachman, and then the pasuk could write uvanim lo yumsu al avos. It could say that the sons cannot die on account of the fathers. To shamat mina trei. And then from that phrase in the pasuk, you'd actually learn out both. You could learn out not only Eved Kanani but ger as well, as follows: chada lo yumsu banim be'edus avos. Number one, you learn out that the sons cannot be put to death based on the testimony of the fathers, again because of their krovim, their relatives. V'idach, and then you can learn out the other as well. Lo yumsu al pi bonim she'ein lahem chayis avos. You would say that you can't be put to death based on the testimony of the sons that don't have lineage with their fathers, and that would be including the case of a ger. It would say that a convert is not allowed to be an aid, and then v'evid nafkale b'kal v'chomer. Then you could actually learn out evid from a kal v'chomer miger. You could learn out from a kal v'chomer from a convert. Uma ger de lamalahu dein lochayis avalamata yesh lochayis. If when it comes to a ger, so again above there's no lineage, meaning by the ger's father, but below by the ger's children there is lineage, and we say over there apostle edus that he's disqualified to testify. Evid she'ein lochayis lo lamala v'lo lamata. Again, when it comes to evid kanani, there's no lineage up or down. Eino din she'ei apostle edus. Then it would be obvious that he also is going to be disqualified for edus, and that's what it could have said if it was true that a ger was disqualified. We would have been able to learn out all of the various halachas. Elami because of Rachmana, but from the fact that the pasuk wrote lo yumsu avos al bonim, it didn't say al b'neihem. It said lo yumsu avos al bonim. So that's the mashma lo yumsu al pi avos she'ein lo chayis bonim, which is mashma that it can't be put to death based on fathers that don't have lineage of their sons. Talking about an eved, shmami no eved she'ein lo chayis lo lamala v'lo lamatu hu the pasuk leda. So therefore, it's clear we're talking only about an eved where there's no lineage up or down. So there we say there's a disqualification for being an aid. Avol ger kevan the yesh lo chayis lamata kasher le'edus. When it comes to a convert, since there is lineage below, so therefore he's kasher le'edus. But the Gemara continues, V'chi tema. Now, if you're going to say, Lichtov rachmanu uvonim lo yumsu al avoseim, that if all of this is true, so then that last part of the pasuk could instead say, Uvonim lo yumsu al avoseim, that sons cannot be put to death based on their fathers. Lama li dekas of rachmanu uvonim lo yumsu al avos. Why does it say, Uvonim lo yumsu al avos, which actually has a mashmos that could mislead? The mashma lo yumsu al pi bonim she'ein lahem chayis avos, because that already sounds like you can't be put to death based on sons who don't have lineage of the father. That actually does sound like it's excluding a ger. Why is it written in a fashion that could mislead us into thinking that we're excluding a ger? And the Gemara says to that, "Aidi the kasav lo yumsu avos al bonim." Since the way it's phrased in the beginning of the pasuk is lo yumsu avos al bonim, kasav nami uvanim lo yumsu al avos. So therefore, the end of the pasuk parallels the first part of the pasuk and says uvanim lo yumsu al avos. And the Gemara continues with the two dots. The Mishnah said, "Cheresh shota v'katan pegiyos rada." When it comes to a deaf, mute, an imbecile, or a minor, an encounter with them is bad. Again, the idea is that the cheresh shota v'katan will not be chayiv if they injure another person, but somebody injures them is chayiv. And the Gemara says, "Imei de Rav Shmuel bar Abba me Hagrunya." The mother of Rav Shmuel bar Abba from Hagrunya havas nesiva leila Rabbi Abba. She was married to Rabbi Abba. Some say it doesn't actually mean the father of Rav Shmuel bar Abba, but it was a different person named Rabbi Abba that she married later on. But in any case, she was married to Rabbi Abba, and kasavtinu lenichse Rav Shmuel bar Abba bara. So she wrote over all of her property. She wanted it to go to her son Rav Shmuel bar Abba. And Basar de Shchiva, after she died. And Rashi explains, Kasavtinu l'nichsei milug, meaning she wrote over her nichsei milug. The nichsei milug is the property that the woman, the wife, brings into the marriage, and so the husband is allowed to get the peiros from that property, but the wife is the owner of that property, and so she wrote over that specific property that it should go to her son again, Rav Shmuel bar Abba. La'achar shenisas l'Rabbi Abba, after she married Rabbi Abba, she wanted to make sure that that property would go over to her son, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Peiches Amud Beis.